What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. One of the most exciting parts of a new game is seeing all the Pokémon that are native to this region, especially the ones that we've never seen before. These additions give each region its own unique flair, however sometimes a Pokémon is just not all that suited to the location that it's in and is made to not be very useful, which can be sad, except that they can always be brought back later to perform amazingly just by putting them in a new spot, reaching their full potential outside of what we knew as their home. So, here are some of the top 6 Pokémon that perform best outside of their native region. Number 6. Gollett. So, right off the bat, we're starting with a Pokémon that I love, so it's not like I'm saying all of these Pokémon are outright terrible by any means, because Gollett is in my top 10 of all time. However, even though it's maybe the coolest Unova Pokémon ever, when you're actually in the games you can't find a Gollett until Dragon Spiral Tower up above the 7th gym. So you're basically already done with everything, and it's not like your new ground type could have contributed against the Ice Gym anyway, so you've got maybe one gym in the Elite Four to actually use this ancient automaton. And believe me, I used it as much as I could against the League, but that was not nearly enough to grow as close to the Pokémon and appreciate it like you could with the rest of your team. So what we needed was a better showcase where these Pokémon could shine, and since the sequels didn't supply that for us, we had to wait for X and Y. For some reason, the Kalos games decided to include Gollett on Route 10, which is just after the 2nd gym. That is crazy early compared to last time, and even though the route is short, Gollett is the most common encounter here. So you can grab this ghost right before the fighting type gym, where they literally can't touch you besides a rock tomb on Machoke that your ground type is going to resist anyway. I know that most people like to use new Pokémon in a fresh generation, however, if you don't like Diggersby, then there are no other native Kalos ground types for you to use all the way up until Zygarde, so you might as well use a Gollett since you were never able to do it before. It's a whole different experience to carry a Pokémon with you for hours on end versus catching it and cramming rare candies down its throat just to catch up to where the rest of your team is by the late game. And when Gollett gets new tricks on top of that like Power Up Punch, boosted by the Iron Fist ability, thus improving its Shadow Punch as well, all before the halfway point, you've got a much better way of realizing the value that these Pokémon can truly present. Number 5. Slugma. This little lava slug has quite a few things going against it, one of which being a horrible typing upon evolution. However, maybe its biggest problem in Johto is shared by many, because it's not actually a Johto Pokémon. For some reason, a good chunk of the new Pokémon in Gold and Silver were locked away deep in the Kanto region. So you probably won't even know that a Slugma is randomly hanging around Celadon City for no reason. Obviously, being post-game is going to leave many players unaware of your talents, since they completed their team long ago, so Slugma was never really given a chance in Johto, meaning it can only go up from here. And maybe they felt bad because they offered a vast improvement next time in Hoenn, where you could find a Slugma in the Fiery Path. Now, I prefer a good Torkoal in my Hoenn region, but since it was so hard to even find a Slugma last time, many players out there just assumed that they were a new Pokémon introduced in Gen 3, so to them it would be just as unique as a Numel for players to try out. And really, all of the fire types in Hoenn are surprisingly slow, so Slugma isn't even outclassed that badly. Granted, you probably won't use it against Flannery's half-ground types, but you could tap into some of that fire against Winona's Skarmory, or even evolve it to rain down rocks on her flock of flying types. There are even some Elite Four members that a Magcargo would be able to effectively tackle, so while it may not be able to solo the whole region or anything, it's a lot better than being forgotten like where it originally came from. Number 4. Tangela. So obviously there are ways that Pokémon can change over time, like getting new evolutions or form changes that could improve them in a later region, but I consciously didn't want the whole list to be made up of just that. However, the exception will be Tangela. The fact that it got an evolution did help immensely, but really just getting out of the Kanto region in general is a blessing for this walking ball of vines. Even though Tangela was the only pure grass type in Gen 1, somehow it only had a singular damaging grass type move with Absorb. All the rest were weak normal attacks, and Slam, which never hits anyway. So yeah, Tangela may have 100 in specials, but it can't even use that because this was before the split. So then that was a huge bonus once it could finally tap into those special grass moves. But of course there was much more than that by evolving into Tangrowth, now having 4 stats 100 or above, and the trigger for that evolution is Ancient Power, which is a special rock attack to take out 3 of its weaknesses. But now also able to dish out a strong Power Whip on the physical side too. So where specifically does Tangela do better? Really anywhere, but some places you don't actually find it until way at the end. However, I think Tangela is pretty well suited to be picked up from the Hisui region. This isn't the first grass type that you'll come across, or even the first one within the Crimson Mirelands, but you'll be able to meet it fairly soon, and can maybe even snag a Tangrowth outright. And having a bulkier grass type will help you pretty immediately against the many rock and ground Pokemon around. And it may be just as valuable in the next 2 sections as well. Plus there are other tricks to use like Aerial Ace or Bulldoze that weren't even available to poor Tangela when we first got to see it. So it almost doesn't matter where it is these days, as you'll be able to find a lot more uses for this bad hairball now than back when it was best known for being traded for a Venonat. Number 3. Dusclops. Similar to the last entry, Dusclops eventually saw an evolution tacked on. However, unlike the last spot, that's not inherently what made Dusclops better, but we'll get to that. Dusclops was never a horrible Pokemon, but it was mostly found around Mount Pyre, which was pretty late in the region, and was a version exclusive on the surrounding routes to boot, so half of the time you may not even find it. But it did have a lot of defenses, so you might have wanted to use it against the Ghosts in the Elite Four, but then you would be just as weak to them, and also not very good against the Dark types that precede it. So you would honestly be better off using one of the many Dark types that you could have gotten a long time ago. Sinnoh came in to offer us Dusknoir, who is a pretty great Pokemon too, a strong Spectre in its own right. However, the story doesn't get good until the Eviolite. This wouldn't have done anything for Dusclops in Gen 3, but by the time Gen 5 rolled around, the Beacon Pokemon could evolve, and therefore have its already high defenses boosted beyond belief. This led plenty of people to use the middle stage over its final form, since one simple item was able to make Dusclops tankier than Dusknoir could ever hope to be. There are plenty of Pokemon that have had this as the case, but the others don't seem nearly as one-sided. And honestly, I would say picking up one in the teal mask is a world of difference, because there the terastallizing means that you could have a Pokemon with 300 defenses of any possible type. That's pretty daunting, especially when you can't know what type to prepare for. So I'm very glad that Dusclops went from being unremarkable to possibly one of the most reliable middle evolutions in the entire franchise. Number 2. Larvesta. I was gonna say Eevee, but technically the most mileage you'll get out of an Eevee itself is the Let's Go games that are set in Kanto. So instead, let's look at Larvesta, because the Unova region sure didn't. You see, quite questionably, they thought it was a good idea to restrict Larvesta to a single egg gift far down a dead-end optional route that you likely won't find until the post-game. And it's cool to get that to fill out your decks, but when it hatches at level 1, it is not worth using, especially since it has the highest base level ever for evolution. And even though you probably caught a Volcarona a long time ago in the desert, you likely didn't use that one either, since it's at an awkward level 2. So needless to say, Larvesta is definitely in the running for the conspiracy theory of not really from their so-called home region, because it's literally not in the wild of the Unova region in either pairing. However, it's not like they became super common after that anyway. Kalos has the Torch Pokemon relegated to the Friend Safari, and only in the Ultra games does it bother to show up in Alola at all. So I'm gonna say that it can really shine best if you pick one up in the Isle of Armor. You can arrive to this spot before the first gym, and even though you do need intense sunlight to be out before a Larvesta can spawn, you could also look around to find them in some of the raid dens. It sure wouldn't take that long compared to usual for this Pokemon, and having a half-bug, half-fire type could be immensely helpful in that first grass-type gym. Now obviously I'm not saying it's gonna be your ace against Nessa or Gordy or anything, but it will make you appreciate Larvesta infinitely more than you ever could in the games that first introduced it. Number 1. Munchlax. As the best of the baby Pokémon, Munchlax was hotly anticipated in Gen 4, and not just because it was introduced years before the games came out. However, we all know the tragedy that befell this big eater, being relegated to the honey trees that all but ensured no one would be able to catch one, even if they bothered with the gimmick at all. So it's honestly not like anywhere else could do worse by Munchlax, but that didn't stop Alola from going the extra mile. Munchlax literally became a Route 1 Pokémon. Kind of, it's behind some smashable rocks, so you can't get one right away, but getting it on the starting island at all before even the first grand trial is great and a massive step up from before. But also, you actually could get Munchlax right from the start, because the Gen 7 early adopter gift was a free one with its special Z crystal attached. Apparently, the higher-ups thought that Munchlax was so integral to the fabric of the Alola region, they wanted to be sure that as many people had them as possible, and then incentivize them to keep it around so that they could try out Snorlax's pulverizing pancake, which is hilarious but also shows the raw power that Snorlax possesses when given the proper motivation. And you can use that power for yourself by raising a Munchlax, which had never really been possible up to that point in the previous 3 generations. And while it's not like there aren't other normal types in the early routes, even as a baby, Munchlax has higher stats than pretty much all of the normal types on Melee. So even with its low speed, Munchlax is really able to contribute in a way the Sinnoh region never would have let it before, finally living up to the hype of its years-long lead-up from over a decade prior. There could be a list at least 3 times as long as this one for Pokémon that are improved elsewhere, but those are just some of the Pokémon that are at their best outside of their home region. Which Pokémon do you enjoy most away from their homes? Let me know down in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And until next time, stay grounded!